how the people are doing. So, the flagship versus the flagship killer. Well, it's always fun when that happens, right? And this time, it's the Xiaomi 15 Ultra that really needs to prove that it is, without a doubt, better as opposed to what the OnePlus 13 can provide. Will it always be better? Well, that's debatable. But let's find out. Let's see if it can actually pull ahead in the overall perspective. And kicking things off with the color profiles. Now, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra has two of them, obviously. The Leica Vibrant, which is what you're seeing right now, and it's good. It's really nice, really well balanced, fairly nice contrast in there, especially for someone who is really addicted to high contrast like me. Well, it's actually not too shabby, but given my addiction, obviously I prefer the authentic approach. It's a personal preference, and obviously you can choose whichever one you want. That's the beauty of having the choice on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. Now the OnePlus 13 is a bit more interesting, as you can probably see throughout. It's good. It is obscenely well balanced, that's the best way to put it. But, however, I do believe that all the other color profiles that we have, all the other options that we have on the OnePlus 13, they're not particularly worth using. They're not consistent enough. Like the vibrant color profile isn't always vibrant, or it doesn't really maintain a proper high level of vibrance all the time. Just as an example, the regular color profile is fantastic, especially for my taste where I prefer natural colors. Fairly high contrast is going to serve you perfectly. But the problem is, we don't have choice. Not nearly as much as you would probably want. Now when it comes to backlit images, I'd say with sunset shots especially, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra does pull ahead, because you can see the highlight preservation is basically just as good, if not a little bit better, but it's the way the roll-off happens, it's the way it's handled. It's handled perfectly, is what I'm trying to say. The OnePlus 13, not quite. However, in other backlit images where the sun was much higher up and not exactly all that warm, I'd say the OnePlus 13 is kind of comparable and competitive in that nature, so it's not bad, but I think overall the approach is a little bit better on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. Now bear in mind, these are small differences, but they do stack up. So once again, based on what your requirements are, you're gonna have to determine for yourself exactly what you want. Now with the ultra-wide cameras, I'd say that the differences are even less as opposed to the main cameras, if not similar to what we saw with the main cameras from time to time. But for the most part, you're not really gonna have any issues from either. That's the best way to put it. And secondly, the OnePlus 13 is not as wide as the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. That is the only legitimate consistent difference between the two. Now with the backlit images, well, I did end up taking way too many of these, so there's that. But other than that, with the sunset shots, with the warm sunlight specifically, I would say that unlike the main camera, I would say the OnePlus 13 is this time pulling ahead with the highlight roll-off. It's much nicer, much more natural, much more pleasing to look at, as opposed to the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, which is not something I expected, but interesting to say the least. But then with the regular backlit shots, I would go so far as to say that the OnePlus once again pulls ahead, not because its highlights are being handled better, that's actually almost exactly the same across the board, but it's because the OnePlus is able to handle contrast much nicer, or rather I should say the shadow detail much nicer. It would appear with the ultra-wide camera, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra really likes to jack up the contrast, and that is obviously because of Leica Authentic, but well, in my opinion, Leica Authentic is one of the best things to happen with the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, so it's kinda sad that it's not perfectly balanced with the ultra-wide camera specifically. But then, the macro situation, you see, this is interesting. The OnePlus 13 doesn't actually have a proper telephoto macro. It says it does, but it doesn't, because the telephoto macro, something that you can just select it as a toggle and it zooms into 3x, it doesn't actually use a 3x camera. Rather, it is a 3x digital crop, which is one of the saddest things that I discovered on the OnePlus 13. It is weirdly deceitful and doesn't make sense as to why it even exists. But well, that's just the way it is, and well, thankfully that's not the case on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. There's a proper 3x telephoto macro. It's not the best macro out there, not even close. You can't really get as close as you would probably want to when it comes to macro images, but it gets the job done. So there have been some ups and downs, but I would not say that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra is quite blowing the OnePlus 13 out the water. Not yet at least, but zoom might be a different story. So let's start it off with the 2x sensor crop. And well, would you look at that? The 2x sensor crop is undeniably better on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. There's no two ways about it. The lack of over sharpening and the higher detail, it's the best of both worlds. Now for the 3x, as Xiaomi has actually had some genuine upgrades. I didn't really expect it, I didn't really see enough marketing about it, but well, it's gone up in quality by quite a bit. And well, that is precisely what you're looking at here, because as you can probably tell, Yes, the OnePlus 13 does a much better contrast. Unfortunately, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra really screwed up the contrast this time around with a very flat look, but despite that, it actually has way better detail preservation and way less sharpening. More than anything else, that's what's really impressive about the Xiaomi, is that it has less sharpening whilst giving us more detail. Now then, long range zoom. So instead of using the 4.3x zoom on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, I cropped into 6x, because that's exactly what we're doing on the OnePlus 13 as well. You see, OnePlus really likes to show off the fact that we have some sort of a sensor crop happening with the 3x telephoto, which gives us effectively lossless zoom with the 6x, but well, as you can probably tell, it's fine. It's very average in terms of quality, not really the greatest thing out there with the OnePlus 13 6x. But the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, it's good. It's got no sharpening, it's got a lot of detail happening, but you'll also notice motion blur. This is a unique issue that we have with the 4.3x sensor, specifically on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. I mean, seriously, I took this at 3 p.m. in the afternoon in Dubai. It doesn't get any bloody brighter than that. Anyways, let's move on over to high resolution. This is of course with the main camera, and I gotta admit, even though we're using high res, which doesn't have any like authentic or vibrant or any of that jazz happening, the color accuracy on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra is commendable. It is much more accurate as opposed to the OnePlus 13. And cropping in all the way, I would say that's a huge difference between the two. The Xiaomi 15 Ultra is pulling ahead by a massive margin. So the main camera can not only provide better 2x sensor crops, its high res is also significantly better. But what about the ultra-wide camera? It would appear once again the OnePlus 13's ultra-wide is pulling ahead, so not only can the OnePlus 13 maintain better balance even with harsh backlight, but the contrast, its detail preservation is also much higher. Now then, with the 3x, I would assume that the Xiaomi is gonna pull ahead here once again based on previous results, but man, I gotta mention it, the magenta on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra in the sky. Dear Lord of mercy, that's way too much. No two ways about it. But despite that, as you would expect when it comes to high resolution and detail preservation, Xiaomi's gonna pull ahead. It's got a really nice 3x camera, and I'm not sure if it's had a sensor upgrade or if it's just a software processing that's gone up by leaps and bounds. Whichever the case, I'm glad it happened. But most interestingly, we have that brand new 4.3x telephoto with 200 megapixels. But this right here, this is the 50 megapixel bin down version. Can it still pull ahead against the OnePlus 13, which does have a bit of a benefit because I did move ahead and take the shot to match the framing, and I gotta admit, the colors on the OnePlus 13 and the contrast, way nicer as opposed to the Xiaomi 15. But cropping all the way in, I would say that both have very close detail preservation. The OnePlus 13 does appear to have a little bit more sharpening, but I think it's the higher contrast on the OnePlus 13 which is actually bringing out a lot more detail as opposed to the Xiaomi, which is kind of doing the opposite here. And this right here is the 200 megapixel mode cropped in version. Well, yeah, that's not good enough to say the least. It does absolutely nothing except for increasing your file size of the image. That's it really. Just not only has that motion blur problem, that bloody motion blur even in daylight, and also this 200 megapixel mode which does not work. I think it really puts into perspective the fact that certain features that are offered by various flagships, including the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, they don't really have practical benefits. And that can be problematic, to say the least. But then when it comes to selfies, I would say quite simply that they're both fairly nice, very close. Both of them have a very nice and wide field of view. But the overall contrast, the skin tones, the saturation even, is handled a little bit better on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra as opposed to the OnePlus 13, and consistently is handled better. It's not a huge difference, but you do see it. And another thing I've noticed is that the OnePlus 13 seemingly has fixed that weird haloing issue that we had on selfies in general, especially regular selfies as opposed to even portraits. So that's nice. But talking about portraits, there are two things to bear in mind. The Xiaomi 15 Ultra, yes, it has better contrast and saturation and skin tones as opposed to the OnePlus 13, but it also has this weird crop that you can't really do anything about when it comes to selfie portraits, which is very unfortunate. I really don't like the fact that we have to crop in with selfie portraits, but that's just the way it is. However, I'm not sure why, but with this specific backlit image, yeah, the Xiaomi is kind of messing up. It's a very difficult shot, obviously, but the OnePlus, just so you know, I took 5 different selfies in the exact same spot, exact same results, That's insane to say the least. But look, in my opinion, regular rear camera portraits, that's what has a lot more value in general in terms of what people really like to use, and it's also something that most companies tend to focus on as well. Now, when it comes to the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, you do get two different modes, master portraits and Leica portraits. I think Leica portraits has been balanced so well now that with very high contrast, it is able to produce some genuinely incredible results. If you don't like high contrast, just go with master portraits. That's the best way to put it. And this case in point, not only are we using Leica portraits, which tends to have high contrast, so you would expect it to cross shadows, but it's not doing any of that. The OnePlus is the one that's struggling a lot more with the dynamic range, whether it's highlight preservation or shadow detail. Generally speaking, I would say the Xiaomi 15 Ultra software has become consistent enough to handle the high contrast look of Leica portraits without messing things up too many times or being too inconsistent, because inconsistency, believe me when I tell you, it can be the bane of the existence of portrait mode. Now, speaking of inconsistency, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra is actually more inconsistent than some of the other flagships I've used. It is still better than the OnePlus 13 in my personal experience. In general, it's going to produce better results, but sometimes, like in this case, it can mess up and just doesn't really look as nice. And even in this case, I would say, although the OnePlus 13 does appear to have a bit of a yellowish skin tone action happening here, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra is still way too dark and the skin tone just looks way too red and saturated. And that's where the balancing issue still comes in. It can happen sometimes depending on the lighting, which was very challenging in this particular case. But despite that, overall, I would still say that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra's portrait mode is gonna give you slightly better results, slightly better balanced results in general. It won't be perfect 100% of the time, as you probably saw. However, when it comes to night mode, I would highly recommend that you use Leica Authentic, because it gives you some of the most natural, some of the most beautiful, some of the most, as the name indicates, authentic nighttime shots. Even as opposed to the OnePlus 13, which does get very close and very natural, but it still doesn't really stack up as opposed to the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. Now, the Xiaomi doesn't actually have a night mode per se, like you'll be confused just as I was, but you just need to use the photo mode and it produces tremendous results. Way better than many of the other flagships that I've got lying around. So I guess the best way to put it is that the OnePlus 13 is going to produce some really nice results in general. And if you don't like the very authentic and natural look of the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, yes, of course, you can use like a Vibrant, which is going to give you less contrast. But outside of that, the OnePlus 13 would be a very good alternative, so to speak. But in general, I would any day of the week pick the Xiaomi 15 Ultra because it just has some of the most, if not the most, natural images when it comes to nighttime, bar none. And well, guess what? The exact bloody same can be said for the ultra wide camera as well. Now, one thing that I feel the ultra wide camera does slightly better on the OnePlus 13 is that it has slightly better dynamic range, especially with like bright signs or bright lights and so on. It does appear to handle those a little bit better, which doesn't really surprise me all that much because that's basically what we saw with the daylight images as well. So the ultra-wide camera in general is just better on the OnePlus 13. Not by a huge margin, but enough to make a difference. However, what about zoom at night? I know this is a bit of a niche situation because you probably don't really want to zoom at night. You're definitely gonna get worse results as opposed to the main camera at the very least, but it's still worth checking out. So with the 2x sensor crop, I think we all saw this one coming because the Xiaomi 15 Ultra is significantly better as opposed to the OnePlus 13. I'd actually expected the OnePlus to perform a little bit better because usually at night, the differences between the 2x sensor crops tend to diminish, but that's not the case. The Xiaomi 15 is still just pulling ahead by a mile. Now then for the 3x, so once again remember the Xiaomi 15 Ultra's 3x has seen a genuine upgrade, which is very impressive, and as you can see, when we crop all the way in, it's very obvious that the OnePlus 13, it's not bad, and it is much closer to what we have on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, but without a doubt, the less processing, the less sharpening, whilst maintaining similar if not more detail in general, and less noise. That's very impressive to say the least. And then of course we have got our 4.3x. Now obviously it's a digital crop on the OnePlus 13, so I don't really think it's going to do all that well. And as expected, when we crop in, well, the Xiaomi 15 is going to do a better job. But once again, we have motion blur. It doesn't really surprise me that we have motion blur because we saw that in broad daylight, so why not during nighttime as well with a long exposure that too? But oddly enough, it's not as bad as I expected, to be honest. Alright, that brings us to the end of this comparison. So, the question, does the Xiaomi 15 Ultra genuinely prove that it is worthy of that hefty price tag as opposed to the OnePlus 13? It's a significant difference, and yes, there are various other factors to consider, but right here we are focusing on photography. And for photography, the Xiaomi In my opinion, at least, it definitely pulls ahead, and it has a lot to offer, a lot more to offer as opposed to the OnePlus 13. Think about it. The main camera is significantly better across the board in all aspects as opposed to the OnePlus 13. Selfie cameras are better. The portraits, for the most part, turn out better, but there's a little bit of give and take there. But with the night mode, without question, the main camera is better. When it comes to our ultra wide camera, though, that's where things get interesting, because that is the one place where the OnePlus 13 consistently pulled ahead. Whether it's the regular shots, the high res, even our night mode, it was all better. So that's surprisingly enough a genuine upside on the OnePlus 13. Like, if you want the ultra wide camera to be good, better than the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, then the OnePlus 13 is the way to go. Simple as that. But everything else was either just as good or a fair bit better as opposed to the OnePlus 13 on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. So my pick personally would be the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. And with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed, found this helpful, and I'll see you guys soon enough with more. Cheers.